Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome, everyone, to the Pros and Cons podcast. We got a very special episode for you today. We are still a podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, and we still feel like pros and sometimes like cons. And today we have brought help, especially for those that we feel like cons. We have brought professional help in the form of Shelley. Shelley, a friend of Paddy's. I'll let Paddy do the official introduction.
Well, I'll let Shelley do the official introduction. Okay, I'll do part of it. Shelley is my friend and colleague. We both work teaching together. Shelley is a writer, a teacher, a former journalist, and does something very interesting that Shelley, when you first told me about what it is you do, I thought, wow, that makes perfect sense. Of course there's someone in the world that does that. But I've never heard of anyone that does something like that. And now I sort of wonder why. Shelley, can you tell us what it is you do in that other avenue of your professional life?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me on. And can I just say, I love the name of your podcast because that is exactly what it's like as a writer.
That was our other co-host, Alex. He really nailed the pun on that one. We're very grateful to
Alex. That was brilliant. What I do basically is most people who are writers can write. You're not stupid. But where writers tend to come undone is that they give themselves a big I have to be swearing. They give themselves
you can
a right
swear.
mind.
You can swear.
Oh, good. They give themselves a right. They give themselves a right mind fuck. And what happens with that is that will actually stop them in their tracks. And it can stop them in their tracks for 3 months. It can stop them in their tracks for 3 years.
Yeah.
It can stop them writing completely. And that to me is the most heartbreaking thing, that a person who has this beautiful superpower, this beautiful gift of stringing together words in a way that brings images to life and has so much wisdom within their body will no longer share it. And that's not okay. And so what I do is I help people identify the reasons behind why they're not writing, why they, when their book got rejected, they suddenly threw it in a corner and put it in book jail and said, I'm never going near you again.
Book jail. That is such a wonderful term. I absolutely love that.
I actually stole that off my friend Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
So you've got to identify what the root of that is. If you want to continue writing, you can stay in the corner sucking your thumb. I don't think it's a great option, but it might be an option. Writers have something within them. There's like this fire that burns and it can never completely go out. So my job is to get rid of all that crap. Find out where that pattern started. Why don't you feel good enough? Why did that criticism hurt you so much? Why do you feel that you are comparing yourself to every other writer out there instead of holding up your own beauty and saying, hey, this is me and this is the way I write and I'm not going to morph it and change it to fit in, or, all of those things. So that's what people hire me to do. They call me all sorts of things. I've been called a word witch, a word doula, and all sorts of things. But yeah, I let's just call it a writing mentor. I am good at teaching people how to write, but that is not my superpower area. My superpower area is helping people free their voice and actually stand up with confidence and say, this is me and this is what I write.
That's so wonderfully explained. I mean, that's such a perfect way of describing it. And I think describes it in a way that immediately speaks to the need that's out there. Because we were talking before this podcast on the imposter syndrome episode that we'd done.
I loved that episode.
Thank you very much. Hopefully other listeners as well. This is an open invitation. If you want to listen to that episode, please go ahead, dear listener.
Yeah.
But it's such a common thing that I think writers experience.
Yeah, do you know what? It's right up there. I would say it's number one-ish, along with the fear of being seen. And imposter syndrome can whisper to you so many untruths at night, and you believe them. You believe them because of maybe that time when you were little and you were told that you weren't very good at something. Or maybe there was a teacher who laughed at you and rubbished your work because they had their own shadow and they were going into comparison and they didn't want this little kid to shine when they couldn't. And you believe these things and they sit in your body and they attract like, right? They attract the same thing. And that the reason I love that episode so much is because you guys were honest. You guys were saying, this is how it impacts me. This is real. I'm not going to try and hide and say, here, I'm so confident and I've got this all the time, because that does so much damage. Because then you've got all these lonely people who are sitting there going, I am the only person in the world who feels like this. And loneliness will kill your writing just as much as comparison. So yeah, if you haven't listened to that episode, please do, because it was just so honest and I loved that.
We always appreciate a plug. I mean, it seems like I'm going to say everyone in Precipice, I think I can speak for everyone, that writing is such a personal thing that insincerity, I don't know if it always comes across, but I think it's a disservice. So being able to be honest and emotional and vulnerable, I think is part of the craft. And I wonder what you think of that, the idea of like vulnerability being really a part of what it is that we are as writers.
It is also the scariest thing for writers. I remember, I try not to be too specific when I give examples on podcasts and things, but a lot of the people I have worked with have given me permission, as long as I don't mention their names and things. I remember one person saying, I don't want people to think that I think this way, talking about their character.
Wow.
And I was like, why not? And they're like, well, I don't want people to think down on me.
Yeah.
And so we had to undo that thread of the fear of being seen as not perfect. You have this face up to the world. If I go back to when I was a journalist, and that label meant so much to me, so much, because it told people my worth in this world. I had a title that I could hold up to the world and say, look, I am worthy. I am something.
Yeah.
And inside I was nothing.
Yeah.
So being able to say, hey, I am a character and I am like this character and I do have vulnerabilities. And yes, I have really sexy thoughts like that. And yes, I am sometimes a villain. Sometimes I want to take power back from where I lost it in the world. And it's that vulnerability that will also make people shut up shop as well. They will stop injecting realness into their characters. They will stop injecting vulnerability into their characters. And, their sex scenes will die. They dry up. They flop. Sorry, but, they dry up because they are afraid of how they will be perceived and how people will talk. We are always worried about that invisible crowd that we are imagined standing there jeering at us. Like, they are present there so much for people. They're like, I won't put that post up on Instagram. I won't put that up like that, because then I can already see these people going to boo at me. That crowd is something that only exists in your head. So why have you put it there?
Yeah.
So vulnerability is one of the hardest things for authors and writers and for people generally.
It's really fascinating to even hear that a person like yourself even exists, because what you're doing is first of all, it is kind of selfless, because you're kind of putting yourself to help others deal with their very personal challenges in a way that I haven't seen done before. I've seen writing coaches, I've seen writing mentors, but you are literally just trying to help them deal with, you've called it beautifully on your website, deal with their shadows. And the way I think you deal with it with a level of respect. Like you're saying, what I liked from what I saw in the website is that, like, it didn't feel to me like you are disregarding the doubt, like you're disregarding the fear, like you're trying to minimize it. Oh, it's small, just ignore it. No, you're saying this thing is massive, and I'm going to hold your hand and we're going to defeat it. But you don't try to paint it as small, which sometimes I think can be a mistake. because we make the other person feel like, oh, there's nothing to worry about. It's just, it's in, you know, it's insignificant. No, it is significant, and we all experience it. And it's fascinating to see that that's, how do you even start when you have a new client? How do you begin to deal with this thing?
Yeah, oh, that was beautifully said. Thank you. It's always nice. I mean, you forget about what you offer the world sometimes until you hear someone talk about it that way. So thank you for that. So when someone contacts me, they are usually someone who's been stalking me for a while, because it feels very vulnerable to go to someone and say, I need help. I don't actually need help with my writings. Sometimes they will hire me saying, I want to inject more emotion because I'm known a bit as an emotional mess, as a person who can really, bring emotion out for people. But the first thing I do is, you can feel straight away as soon as someone walks in the room how they're feeling. That's just a human thing. You can feel it in a child. You can feel it like when you walk into a rest home, as an example I'm using because I've just been to one recently, and you can feel, a certain feeling there. And so when I meet someone straight away, I can feel what's going on for them. And whether it's sadness, whether it's frustration, whether it's they don't believe, or anger sometimes. And really, I just start talking to them, and they go, yeah, that's exactly it. How did you know that? Did you just go into my undie drawer and look at all my secrets? And I'm like, well, what you think is so hidden sometimes isn't. Okay. And I've been there. The thing about me, and I guess why I am so fortunate, I've really only been doing this for 3 years, and I'm so blessed that it does so well to support me, is because I'm real. People know that about my journey. I'm not going to say, hey, life is fantastic and wonderful and it's always daffodils and everything like that. I tell them, I have been where you have been. That black hole that you've been in, I was in the one next to you. Okay. So we're not going to pretend that what you are feeling in your body is make believe. It's not. And even though, and you're going to feel weird and stupid and sometimes even a failure as a human being, because we are told that we aren't meant to have these things, but we fucking do. We do. And they hurt. I've got just a couple of, they were a while ago now, but beautiful people who had just experienced grief. They were trying to write. And I said, you can't write right now because grief is not allowing you to, because you need to sit and talk with grief first. Stop trying to force yourself to write. You can't right now. And they're like, oh, I thought you were going to tell me to just push through. And I said, you loved the person who was passed over. Sit with that, allow that to happen. And then when you have cried, and then when you have allowed all that to flow out, then you can come back to your writing, and then maybe even you can write to help you through. I don't care if all you write is fuck you for leaving, fuck you for dying, or I say I don't care if that's all you write in your journal until we meet again. And that's exactly what they did. But there's just no point in pretending that we aren't human beings. We were given emotions. We were given these beautiful things called emotions to help us understand who we are. So let's not pretend we don't have them, and that sometimes they really fuck us up.
And that comes right back to what you were saying, I guess, about being in our own heads and stopping ourselves. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like in a situation like that, what you were describing, the people were so in their own head about their grief and what they'd experienced that they couldn't kind of access the flow of writing. Am I kind of on the right track with that?
They were numb. Your body is really important to the experience of writing. Your body, if it is closed, when you're having a bad day and just like this, okay, creativity can't flow through you when you're feeling like that. You're just you're numb, okay, and you just can't feel anything. You're just walking around existing. And so to really let that beautiful flow come through, wherever that comes from for you. Some people call it the flow, some people call it the oracle. There's so many cool words for it. But you know that zone where time disappears and you're just like, I'm the best fucking writer right now. It's just flowing off my fingertips.
Absolutely.
Your body needs to be able to hold your writing. It needs to be able to flow through you. So a lot of what I do as well is getting people to calm the fuck down. You know, well-being is really important as a writer. And I know that we think if we drink 6 cups of coffee, that our genius will just pull through us. Well, probably for an hour, but you'll be fucked after that.
You know, what I like about that is that I felt when I just started out, I felt like I had this clock over my head, and I had it in my mind that I had that timeline in my head, and I'm like, this is when I want to be a successful writer. This is how long it should take me. And I think that's problematic on so many levels, because sometimes you go online and you compare yourself to these people that have done this and that at a certain time, and that's not healthy, because like you said, sometimes your life circumstances are just what they are. Like, you need to work extra hours to pay rent, you need to send money to mom and dad, you need to feed your kids, you need to finish the bachelor's degree that you started. Maybe you just need to plan a wedding, and that takes you out of the loop. And I think that forgiving yourself, not even forgiving, there's nothing to forgive, but just accepting that that's normal is very important. And I'll just drop one example. We got Mr. Tolkien himself. He published the thing when his kids, I think The Hobbit came out when his kids were what, 8, 10? He didn't start writing at that age. The guy started writing probably when he was 12. I don't know. He had to finish his master's, he had to finish his PhD, he had to get married, he had to change diapers, he had to teach. And when the time was right, he sat down and he knocked out The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings while taking notes all the while.
Yeah, you know, there's a bit of trust involved. Your writing will land for you when you are ready, when you've created the space for it, when you need something to heal from. A lot of people, especially those who write poetry, you know, they've got some shit to work out in their lives, and it will land. I mostly deal with writers who are above the age of 30. I've dealt with a lot of 60, 70-year-olds who just say, Shelley, I don't want to die not knowing. And I'm like, fantastic, let's bloody go for it. So yeah, I hear that. There comparison, and I say this so much to every class that I teach, comparison is a thing that will kill your authentic writing. If you are so busy out in the world going, oh, they did it by then, they did it by this, you're so busy looking outward that you are not looking inward and going, okay, what is my authentic writing? Where, let it come out. You're too busy being mean to it, saying you're not good enough because you didn't do it like this person. Your writing can hear that you are saying to it, you're not good enough. I'm fucking 40 now. We were meant to have 2 books published. Shame on you, writing. And so your writing's going to go, fuck you, and disappear, you know? So if you put that kind of pressure on your writing, it is going to have that reaction, and you're not going to enjoy it anymore. I said that I was going to have my first book published by 30. Tell you what I didn't plan on having. I didn't plan on having another career. I didn't plan on having eating disorders and depression and anxiety. I didn't plan on getting married. I didn't plan on getting divorced. I didn't plan on being in an abusive relationship. These things all happen. You can't plan for that. And so when you go into comparison and when you try and control your writing, it is ultimately going to give you a bit of a mind fuck, because writing does not like to be controlled. You can try, and that will squeeze the life out of it. But writing does not like to be controlled. And that's when I have to say to people, where else in your life are you trying to control everything? And they're like, oh my gosh, everywhere. And I'm like, yeah. Should we have a little look at why you think you need to control everything? Why do you feel unsafe in this world? And they're like, and I'm like, it's okay. We all feel unsafe at some level. But, you know, you're going into hyper planning. People who I have to be careful how I say this actually, because everyone has a different creative blueprint. Everyone creates in a different way. Some people are beautiful planners. They will literally plan out what they're doing to a word count and like write it to there. Whereas, you know, me, I just sit down, write. 3 weeks, I wrote my first draft in, and I was like, boom, bang, done. But then it took me 2-3 years to edit the damn thing.
We talk about this
So
often, actually, the pantser planner like dichotomy, we call it. It comes up all the time.
So
I
when I
refuse
sometimes
to accommodate the other
yeah,
side.
you've got to know your creative blueprint. Like, if you are not a planner, don't be a damn planner. Okay, let it flow. If you are a person that like your creativity gets so turned on by planning, like it's a real, oh yes please, you're getting hot under the collar, then do it that way. But for God's sake, don't do it because someone taught you that. Do it because it is part of your creative process. Yeah. I hate planning, but my friend, she bloody froths under it and she soars. So yeah, get to know your creative process.
I'll just say that our podcast is full of planners propaganda, mostly thanks to me, because I love planning. But Shelley hit it like she said it like it is. Don't do it because Matan Elul said that you should, all right? Or probably more successful writers might have said that. Do it because it feels right, because it works for you, because you like it. But it would be nice if you like it, because planning is great. But that's it. That's me.
I am I'm a real flower, like, you know, pretty much dancing out in the fields with the daffodils, creating as I go. But then I need the structure to come back. Otherwise, I'll be lifting off all over the world, not actually getting anything fucking done. And that's one of my writing shadows, is that I am so much in love with the flow and the feeling and the yumminess as it comes through. I forget to finish the damn work. All right. So that's the shadow that I have currently working through with my writing tribe. They're like, Shelley, would you just damn well finish your novel? And I'm like, oh, but I've just fallen in love with this. And so one of them is fantastic on structure. And she's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. But yeah, if you are planning because of a major control thing, then that's really going to turn off the flow of your art as well.
Something I've been really wanting to ask you since we first talked about this actually is how you got started with this. Because I know that you've always been a writer and you were a journalist. I just struggle to imagine how anyone without there being like a school that teaches a diploma in like writing counseling, how you actually get started on this path. So how did it start for you?
What happened?
What happened?
I'm still a little weirded out at how it happened, because it doesn't seem like me, because I was an investigative journalist, and my old colleagues would probably not recognize me now. Very much the hustle, very much the competition, very much, I was known for being very compassionate. So I guess if people ask me what my biggest story was, there were a few, but I did spend about a year after work. I would head to, there's a street that was known for sex workers, and I would hang out there with the men and women, and it was in post-quake Christchurch. So there's a lot of abandoned buildings. And so I would, all the homeless people would be in those abandoned buildings, and I would stay with them overnight and really get to know them and things like that. So I was known for that level of dedication to what I was. I call it mad now. I look back at that and I'm like, what the fuck was really dangerous what I was doing. It didn't feel dangerous because I see people as people. And it was very interesting. I once had a cop just go, what are you doing? And I said, they're not dangerous. Not once you're part of their community, not once they trust you, not once they see that you also equally as fucked up, but you just got on different clothes. So I was really, I can see how my colleagues would be like, what's Shelley doing now? But before that, I was, I guess, a good way of describing it would be a youth worker / social worker. And I used
Mm.
to deal with young people who had come to the attention of police or the authorities and things like that. Not great home lives, not great mental health. So I always had that part of me. And I guess that's why I was so good as a journalist as well, because people would sit down and tell me their stories and then go, I can't believe I just told you all that. And I'd be like, well, it's on the record now. Yeah. And then I decided I was so sick and tired of being drunk. I was so sick and tired of being unhappy. I was so unhappy. I would spend 5 days a week as a journalist working nonstop. I would get up thinking about stories. I would get up thinking about the newsroom when I was an editor. I would be writing stories all the time. I was so stressed. And I would have 2 bowls of red wine at night. And I'd be like, this is normal. And I was like, inside I'd be like, this is not fucking normal.
Yeah.
But it's really acceptable, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sure. She stinks
Yeah.
of red wine the next morning, but that's totally acceptable.
Yeah.
And I was just on the last few years of my eating disorder as well. And I was so anxious. And then I was like, well, I've tried everything else. I've tried booze, I've tried overworking, I've tried an eating disorder. What else you got for me? And I was like, fine, I'll give yoga a go. I'll give meditation a go. It's not going to fucking work, but I'll give it a go. And then I feel happy. And I was like, oh, I don't think I actually like my work anymore. And it coincided with, I ended my journalism career with a touch of PT. No, not a touch, a big fucking wallop of PTSD, because I'd covered some pretty gnarly stories and it was time to get out. So I was saving my money frantically. And then what happened? I was starting to teach meditation, because people were like, oh my gosh, you just look so happy. You look so changed. You're like walking around like you're a little fairy. And I was like, and so I started teaching meditation and visualization. And then people just started booking one-on-ones with me. And I was like, sorry, what? You want me to sure, I don't, yeah, cool, what? So I started charging for these one-on-one sessions. And then I did a couple of things on like EFT and all these other well-being things.
So EFT?
Yeah, EFT. Like, it was so important to me to get certification, right? I needed to have that thing that I could hang on the wall and say, I am worthy. I can charge you for this. And it's so funny because I have no qualifications. I have no qualifications as a journalist. And yet I was an editor, because when I was at university, before I could finish, the editor hired me. And I was like, don't have qualification. Fantastic. So I don't know. And when I was a youth worker, social worker, no qualification either.
Yeah.
So yeah, people just started hiring me. And then I started doing online courses, and word of mouth just spread, and more people booked one-on-ones. And then there just became a trend that I was working with artists and writers, and then they would tell their friends who are writers or authors. It just spread like that. And I was just a little taken aback, to be honest. I was like, wasn't planning this, but yeah, I'll take it. I would definitely take it. And so I quit my job, to everyone's shock, really, apart from mine. So it's a bit of a long story.
It's perfect. And when you say it like that, it makes perfect sense. Like someone who's very empathic, who's used to interviewing and finding the truth of things, who has themselves experienced creative block and a lot of unhappiness with where they are. I mean, of course, I don't want to say, of course, you ended up where you are, but if this were a story, you'd get to this point in the story and think like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. I see why the author's done this. Like, yeah, they were setting up for a while.
Speaking of not finishing college, I mean, Steve Jobs, I think, has famously dropped out before he finished university. He said in his speech, if I recall, you can't connect the dots forward. You can only connect the dots backwards. Only looking back, you can see how your life really makes sense. And your story really
Yeah.
makes sense, but you couldn't have known that when you were feeling down, when you were feeling at a dead end.
No.
You could have seen the horizon and say, oh yeah, I'll go there, there, and there, and then I'll end up somewhere nice.
That is so hard also for writers to understand. As a writer, you have to believe in something that hasn't yet been created. You have to believe in yourself so much. And the problem with humans is that we will only believe in it if we can see it and it's tangible. So we have to believe in this thing that we desire with our whole hearts. And we've got no promise that it's going to work out. We've got no promise.
Nada.
And that can really fuck with your head as well. But
Yeah.
if you had told 12-year-old Shelley that she would be sitting here, she would be rolling on the floor with laughter because I was so shy, I would cry if I had to do a speech at school.
Wow.
And I couldn't, like, even in journalism, I would take my byline off stories after the sub-editors had done their thing because I didn't want, I wanted to be invisible. And I find that a lot with writers as well.
Yeah.
That they have a real problem with being seen and being heard. And that's a real common one as well that I deal with. There's a real, it's probably right up there with imposter syndrome, actually.
You know, you brought up the story of the writer who didn't want to write something because they were afraid people will think that that's what they think. They were afraid of sharing their thoughts. If you had to make like a checklist, what are like the top few issues that you usually identify in people who are having this issue? What are like the things that commonly pop out as issues, as roadblocks?
The first one is judgment, fear of judgment.
Mm.
Let's be honest. Someone is going, that beautiful creation, that manuscript that you have created, that canvas, that artwork that you have put as a representation of something in your soul, someone is going to take that and shit all over it. That is part of the submission process. And that, the fear of failure and getting that feedback would be number one. Even getting feedback in a Google Doc, people feel like they've been stabbed in the heart and their heart goes nuts. Like you can actually feel their heart going dun, 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 and then their mood goes down and then they start feeding those thoughts with, I'm shit. I knew I was shit. I'm not good enough. Oh my gosh, the whole world is laughing at me. If they send it to multiple agents or publishers and get nothing back, I'm shit. I'm worthless. I shouldn't be doing this. And so it is about tracing that back, all the way back to where that thought first started, because that is something that's in your psyche. That is something that is in your body, this fear of failure. And unless you look at it and sit down and have a cup of tea with it and say, hey, why are you here? Because you're a pattern and you keep showing up for me. If something is a pattern in your life and it keeps showing up, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's in your work, then you need to be dealing with it because it's just going to keep coming. So fear of failure, fear of judgment are the top ones. Then imposter syndrome. No one believes they're a good writer. I've worked with authors who are on their third book. They still think they're a shit writer. And I'm sitting there going, I want to be on my third published book. Are you serious? But of course I'm going, okay, I really understand what you're going through because they truly do not believe, they're like, oh, it was just a fluke that I sold books 1 and 2. And I'll be like, okay, all right. So that imposter syndrome is huge. And one of the biggest ones is I've had so many, and it's people don't present to me with just 1 or 2. That there's usually one thing will come up and then they'll say, oh, Shelley, it's something else this time. But it is, when your throat gets so closed up, like you're about to give a speech or something. And a lot of writers have that, like their throat is so clenched. And you guys are great because you're doing a podcast and you're teaching, so you're used to being seen, but what if you were talking about your writing or something like that, and there's this real big fear of being seen authentically and being seen as it's so vulnerable to people, but like even on their social media, like, oh my gosh, authors and writers really struggle to use social media. They are so afraid of that invisible audience booing and hissing at them And they're completely, and that audience is completely made up, because most people, when they're looking at your social media, are only going to scan it for 1 or 2 seconds, and that's it. They're either going to move on or love your content. But there's like this real fear of being seen and being heard and having a voice. And a lot of that is societal conditioning. A lot of that is how you grew up. A lot of that is who you grew up with. I know for me that growing up, I was told to be quiet a lot, that I was, when I was younger, I loved to be on stage. I was like, I'm a Leo. So I was like, yeah, look at me. Yes, 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 yes. And I was told, be quiet. Don't bring so much, be humble. Don't bring so much attention to yourself. And that really stuck with me, to the point that I didn't say a word in class, that I never shared my writing with anyone, that my hands shook when I went to give a speech. And so many writers understand that feeling.
Taking back real quick to the to the comment about imposter syndrome. You know how they say that if you walk into a prison and ask who's done it, everybody's innocent. And I feel like if you asked all the writers on planet Earth who's a good writer, you'll just get crickets. Like everybody in the world are bad writers.
So a lot of that is understand your superpower as a writer. A lot of what I'm doing is saying to people, here, I'm leading them into their authenticity. A lot of it is getting rid of the persona that they thought they had to write in, and to actually reveal who they are. That's a lot of what my courses are about. And just getting into flow writing. I do a lot of flow writing with people so that they can actually hear their authentic voice, instead of the one that has been drummed into them. But yeah, a lot of it is confidence and owning your superpower. Every writer has a superpower that no other writer has, and it's beautiful. So know that about yourself, celebrate that about yourself in the times where you're sitting down in the corner, sucking your thumb and gently rocking yourself.
Beautifully said. Something you said really stood out to me just now. You said that so many writers have issues with their social media being seen. And when I first thought about that, I thought like, well, that seems counterintuitive. Like a writer, one would have thought would be someone who intuitively wants to be seen. Otherwise, one could argue, why are they writing? Do you think it's something, obviously everyone and all sorts of professions and types of people have, it's like these self-doubts, but do you think there's something particular to writers that makes us particularly prone to these sorts of fears and doubts?
I want to say yes. And the reason that I want to say yes is because sometimes you have to learn what not having your voice sounds like in order to claim it.
That's interesting.
The only reason I learned to claim my voice was by not having it, by being completely disempowered. And yet you will have some writers who have beautiful presence, who can stand up and hold their superpower up to the world. And so for them, it may be another writing shadow. Also, because my story will resonate with my clients, so they'll go, oh shit, yeah, that's me. I also don't say how I feel, didn't speak. I was also a person who took my byline off my stories, and so they feel that. But yeah, a lot of there is a pressure as well to put a certain confident persona across on author social media. You've got to put this persona across. I don't want to see a cookie cutter replicator social media page. I want to see you. I want to see you. And that is how you attract people to your social, which is so interesting, because I don't have like huge amounts of followers or likes or anything like that. Most of mine came through word of mouth and through my email database. But it's that presence and holding your art and being proud of your art is quite hard for people to do. And so, yeah, social media does help with that. That's why I get a lot of people posting on social media as a way to overcome that fear of presence as well.
As I'm an English teacher in my day-to-day life, I teach teenagers aged 14, 15, 16, 17, and social media is it can go so many ways, but you can just see,
Mm.
especially at that age, and not just that age, how some people just feel uncomfortable posting themselves on social media because they compare themselves to Instagram influencers or to famous people or to people who are always funny whenever they post something.
Yeah.
One thing I like about writing is that I want my writing to be known. I don't necessarily have the need to be known myself. And I think a lot of writers feel that way. That's why they use pen names. That's why they don't put their face in front of things, because you kind of have that hope that even in today's world that it's all marketing and brand, that at the end of the day, good writing can just kind of speak for itself. And it doesn't matter if the writer themselves sounds good, looks good in front of a camera, is charismatic. I mean, it helps, I'm sure, but I'm glad to say that some of my favorite writers, I have no idea what they look like beyond the little picture at the back of the book. I would love to listen to their podcasts, but I haven't chosen them based on their podcast. I've chosen them based on going to the bookstore, opening the book, and looking at page number 1.
Yeah.
And I hope that can continue.
If you have claimed your art, and people who have published and things like that, if they have claimed their art and said, these are my words and these are out in the world, then they saying that I do have a lot of authors who are on book 3 and not being able to claim their presence. So I think there's two schools of experiences there. Is people who claim their art in a way that they have their presence and they have their confidence. Then there are people who are ashamed of their presence and want to hide away and want to hide behind pen names, and because they are ashamed of their presence, because they grew up with the messages, don't be seen, be humble, who do you think you are to stand out from a crowd? And those things are really impacting their writing and the potency of their writing. That's when it becomes a shadow.
Yeah.
But if a person holds their writing, holds their art, and is able to be in presence with it, that is different. So it all goes behind the intention behind it. And with social media, I say, what is your intention behind it? And my intention behind using social media was to break my curse of being ashamed of who I was. I didn't have a photo of me taken for 10 years because I hated my presence. I was something to be ashamed of because I had been taught. I had the most, let me just say, my parents, had the best parents in the world. And my mum was shocked when she heard that I had these stories. And then when I explained where they came from, she was like, okay. And I said, Mum, you loved me with so much beauty and nurture and fierceness, but it wasn't enough to counter all those things I had going on around me and that permeated into my soul. So that's why I started social media. It was never to actually promote my business. It was to claim my art and my reason for being. Instead of saying, Shelley, you need to be invisible, you need to be deleted because you are something to be ashamed of. Well, no, I'm going to break that curse by saying, here I am and here are my words. So again, it's the intention behind why you use social media. If you are using social media, if you are constantly scrolling as a way to compare and to say how you lack, then you need to look at the core reason about why you are doing that. Why do you feel that you lack inside? It's not going to be enough just to take Instagram, or I can't remember all the platforms, off your phone. That's not going to be enough. You need to deal with the core of why you are looking at the world and attaching your worth externally all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear you on that one.
That sounds like some advice that's just applicable broadly in the 21st century, not at all just to writers.
Yeah.
If there was it's hard to like boil things down to like a single piece of advice, but if there's some main advice that you find yourself giving often, or you think is just applicable to most or many or some of the writers that you come across, what do you think that would be?
Don't be afraid of being you. It is so scary for some people to let down their label, to let down the mask, and actually go beyond that, to go within them. But that is where your beauty is. That is where your wisdom is. That is where your authentic prose, your authentic writing lives. And it doesn't live behind that mask, that label that you've created for yourself. You are not a shitty writer. Please get that out of your head. You are a scared writer. And that is okay. We are all scared. I still, every week, I am working on yet another layer of why I don't want to be seen, and why I think this week, for some reason, why I think I'm so shit, why I think that I have to go into toxic productivity in order to be worthy.
Toxic
You know?
productivity is such a good term. I really like that, actually.
Yeah,
I've not heard that
that's-
before, but it makes, you
Yeah.
can feel the truth of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
was it recently I just did something on toxic productivity? I can't remember, but yeah, there's good
Mm.
productivity and toxic productivity.
Yeah.
You touched really close to the heart right now with the, like, I didn't expect to. Yeah.
Matan puts a lot of pressure on himself, we think, as a writer,
Yeah,
which I'm sure is good and bad, but
you know, toxic productivity comes from comparison. It comes from the world that we've been brought up that, you know, I used to work in a newsroom, and if your fingers weren't moving, you were not worthy of being a journalist. And it's all, anyway, that's toxic. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
We should
But
do an
yeah,
episode about toxic productivity.
Yeah. Yeah, we
it's a
should. We
huge
should.
one. It's a huge one. I've just actually done a recent podcast on it, because
All right, we should listen.
my God, you are so worthy of being a writer, and just hold that so much. Remember the joy that it gives you. Remember that beauty when you're sitting there and you feel like a fucking genius because these words are erupting out of you. Those words chose you to give birth to them. And yeah, you are going to hit some walls on the way, but empower yourself to know what those walls are made out of, so that you can understand the wisdom that they're there to teach you, but also move through them. Please, we need wisdom in this world. We need entertainment in this world, and you are worthy. So get your ass off the ground, get a tribe around you. That's the number one important thing I say to people. You don't, fuck me, you don't need to hire me. Okay, it'd be nice if you did, but get a tribe around you. Okay, get three people who are gonna hold you up and say, okay, let it all out. You think you're shit and everything. All right, now let us hold you in that space, not to fix, not to take it away, but to hold you while you vent. Because I tell you one thing that writers are bloody good at: solving their own things. They've just got to speak. How many of you guys solve your own issues when you stand there and actually talk about it? You suddenly go, hello, I'm talking and I've just actually solved my own problem. Holy cow. Yeah, it's a strength. Use it.
All the time on the podcast, we talk about how sometimes we'll talk about a topic, and as we're speaking, we'll realize it, and sometimes realize we know things that we never verbalized before.
And this is why I love podcasts, because the one I do with my writing tribe, I was feeling so shit yesterday. Like I was feeling really down because I just had a PTSD flashback, and I was like, oh, fuck, where did that come from? It's been years.
Yeah.
And my beautiful partner, he's amazing. And he was like, well, it's lucky you've got your podcast, because he said that's a bit like therapy. And I was like, yeah, it is. And so we were talking about it. And then afterwards, all three of us were like, oh my gosh, we feel so much better. So start a podcast. You don't even have to fucking publish it. Okay. If you've got that fear of being seen, you can just store them all up. Who gives a shit? But talk to your tribe. Okay. Get a tribe like these guys, you know?
I like that. I like that.
Sure.
That feels like really solid advice.
Our last episode really felt therapeutic. I mean, wasn't the last, but the one we did, the imposter syndrome, I felt like you guys, I needed this. I didn't even realize we did it to like help our listeners, but as we were going, I'm like, man, this is the good stuff.
It is. Yeah, because it's the stuff that will absolutely fuck us up in the long run. So we've got to get it out.
Sure.
We've got to get it out. You guys can write. You guys can build characters. You guys can do all of those things. All right. What we need help with is being human.
Shelley, I'm just happy people like you exist, because that's a very neglected aspect of writing. Who is a writer? And I think the answer should just be whoever fucking wants to be a writer.
Yes.
That's a writer. You know, the title of a writer, we're making it this elusive thing. We're putting it on a pedestal. Just write. You're a writer.
Yeah.
You want to be a published author? Okay, there's people that can help you with that. Practice, work on your craft. You've been amazing with some really, really good nuggets of wisdom. And honestly, I'm going to go listen to your podcast about toxic productivity and probably some other episodes. Really, the last question I want to ask you is, Shelley, where can people find you? If they listen to the podcast and they want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Very simply, it all filters through my social media. So at Shelley Robinson Alchemy. And there is a link tree there to all my offerings and things like that. But yeah, just DM me. I just love talking to human beings. I don't even give a shit if you're a writer, to be honest.
Even if you're an AI listening and you feel like you need someone to beep boop with, please don't stop yourself.
That's right. The AIs need love too.
Got to be inclusive.
And Shelley, the podcast that you do make, I think that's something listeners should definitely listen to. And if they enjoy us, then I think this is exactly the sort of thing that they would get a lot out of. What is the name of the podcast and where can people find it?
It's Novel Sentence, and it is a podcast for writers trying not to lose the plot. So
yeah, we love a good pun.
That's so good.
On Precipice.
I didn't come up with that because that is not my superpower. I have on the podcast, there's Kerry, who used to be in the publishing world. She was a commissioning editor, and Kate, who's a children's author, and they are very clever wordsmiths, and that is not my forte. You want to talk about your emotions, call me, but I cannot come up with a pun.
And we've got Alex for our puns. He's our department. We're going to put all the links to your properties as well in the show notes. So listeners, if you want to find anything that Shelley does, check out the show notes. Everything will be there. Shelley, thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much from this. And when I spoke to you the first time about what you do, I knew that, Shelley would make a really good podcast guest. And you did not disappoint.
Oh, I'm just so grateful. I just love hanging around fellow writers because it is can be so isolating sometimes, and you guys are a fucking vibe. I mean, that episode is great. I was just sitting there going, yeah, right, yeah. And then I started like cyber stalking some of you. I was like, oh my gosh, that was so good. What did they say? Where are they?
Shelley, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll even have you back again sometime if you would care to be back, because I know we would definitely love to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.